Sir Lewis Dive, as Royalist Governor of Sherborne, was first approached by the clubmen in March of 1645. With the continued outrage being inflamed by Royalist General Goring's forces in the southwest, Sir Lewis Dive saw it fit to quell their anger. With colour, 40 horse and their furniture, i.e. riding tackle, Lewis Dives boosted the clubmen's arsenal. The clubmen were reported as: "We with great courage are now resolved to die, as to suffer the intolerance and outrages as put upon us by Goring's forces." By May of 1645 things between the Royalist garrison, under Sir Lewis Dives in Sherborne Castle, had now taken a turn for the worst. The continued outrages being enforced upon the people in the southwest, by General Goring's forces, had put Dives out of favour with the clubmen. At a place between Shaftesbury and Blandford a meeting of clubmen was held. Here it was agreed to stop the payments to the Royalists in Dorset, and a threat made to join the parliamentarian forces in the west, under command of General Graves and Weldon. The clubmen were still very much a force of their own through May, June, July in Dorset, as can be seen in their resolve to keep petitioning and demands for a stop between King and Parliament in their hostilities. The focus on Goring is of great importance here also. The clubmen were prepared to do whatever was needed, Royalist or Parliamentarian alike. By August, with Fairfax and army now in Dorset, and planning siege to Sherborne, the ongoing communications between the clubmen and the Governor of Sherborne Castle were seen as a threat by Fairfax. It gives us good reason as to why the clubmen had decided to meet at Shaftesbury on August 2nd, 3rd, and why Fairfax was eager to quash this third force before it was able to ignite as a revolt. Both King and Parliament had no desire to see the clubmen succeed in a vision of their own making. Fairfax, in a letter addressed to his father on the 3rd-4th of August 1645, speaks of his arrival at Sherborne and his desire to push Goring into Cornwall. The clubmen of Dorset, Hampshire and Wiltshire are seen as dangerous if not quashed. We have taken 13 or 14 of their chief leaders. Lieutenant Cromwell is gone out with some horse to hinder the clubmen's meeting, which I hear they have appointed to command and demand their leaders. We must not neglect their business, for their violence is probable to lead them to some foolish attempt, which I hope may make them repent their errors, if they will not be advised which way I desired him just to make use of. On the 2nd-3rd of August 1645 Fairfax, now knowing of a planned meeting of clubmen in Shaftesbury, sent Colonel Charles Fleetwood with 1,000 horse to quash. Fleetwood surrounded these clubmen at a place called Castle Hill. He then captured the leading members and then returned with them to Sherborne, where Fairfax was stationed. Luck would have it, the Reverend Dr. Thomas Brevel, one of the leading men in the clubmen movement, was not taken prisoner. With anger rising at the arrests, the Reverend would hold a large part in what would later be played out on the 4th of August at Hambledon Hill. With the church bells ringing, the signal to gather was heard. Sherborne being the target, to free those previously took in Shaftesbury. The clubmen, with white cockade in their hats, numbering according to accounts from Fairfax's parliamentary report, 2,500, although some accounts put the number at 4,000. With horse, drum and banner and armed with flintlock, scythe and pitchfork. The rendezvous at Hambledon Hill was set. On the 4th of August 1645 Lieutenant General Cromwell, having been given intelligence of a clubmen rendezvous in the county of Dorset, set forth to engage. With a party of 1,000 dragoons from Sherborne heading towards the town of Shaftesbury and passing through Sutton Waldron, his first encounter came at Duncliffe Hill, a heavily wooded area near the town. Seeing colours flying from the top of the hill, Cromwell sent a lieutenant with a small party to see the meaning of the flying colours and to acquaint the holders of that the Lieutenant General of the army stood at the bottom of the hill. Upon hearing this, and knowing Cromwell in person was at the bottom of the hill, a Mr. Richard Newman descended to meet with, and there questioned Cromwell on why the gentlemen, leaders of the clubmen, had been taken in Shaftesbury the previous Saturday. Cromwell replied, that they had been taken under General Fairfax's authority, and are to be tried judicially for raising a third party in the kingdom. Fairfax did not want to see their places plundered, and they could defend any violence coming upon them. They should also bring any grievance against them to the new model army, whereupon the culprits would be punished. He followed in his reply to Richard Newman. The clubmen leaders taken in Shaftesbury, if found guilty, would face charges to that nature; if innocent, would be freed by Fairfax himself. Cromwell, with a small party, went with Mr. Newman to meet with the clubmen gathered at the top of the hill, whereupon they agreed to Cromwell's assurances and returned to their homes. Which seems rather surprising. Maybe they knew what massive body of clubmen were gathering at Hambledon Hill. On Hambledon Hill, a large Iron Age hill fort, a gathering of 2,000 to 4,000 clubmen, were preparing to march upon Sherborne. To free, as mentioned before by Newman, from the account at Duncliffe, the leaders captured in Shaftesbury, under General Fairfax's authority earlier. Being led by Reverend Thomas Brevel from Compton Abbas, this body of men were to change tact, and take up a defensive position on the hill, after hearing Cromwell was heading their way. On arriving, Lieutenant General Cromwell and his dragoons were met by a man at the foot of the hill holding a musket. When asked what he was doing, he said he was joining the clubmen. After being told to lay down his weapon, he cocked his musket and aimed at them. Being forced to the ground, his weapon was taken while he was left unharmed. Cromwell saw the hill fort was well defended due to the earth-ridge fortifications. A narrow channel for an entrance, Cromwell saw his dragoons could only enter, just 3 abreast. Sending a lieutenant and 50 of his dragoons to ask someone from the clubmen entrenched on the hill to negotiate, resulted on them being fired upon. The narrow entrance to the hill fort was tactically an advantage to the clubmen. Cromwell would soon change from a negotiating standpoint to a confrontational option. Cromwell then sent a clubman by the name of Mr. Lee, who, going back and forth, made 2 attempts passing the message that if they disbanded no harm would come upon them. After being fired on again, Cromwell sent Captain Lieutenant Gladman's troop to approach them, where they were fired on yet again. 2 dragoons were shot and killed, 4 horses and up to 9 troops wounded. Thereafter followed a show of force. Major Desborough with his dragoons, whereon finding or maybe being told of a rear entrance to the hill fort, charged at the clubmen from behind. Clubman Reverend Thomas Brevel could be heard above the chaos shouting, they must stand to it now, and that rather than lose their armies, he would pistol them that gave back. The battle went on for several hours, not the so-called 1 hour as in the parliamentarian report. The balance was always in favour of Cromwell's more disciplined troops. Finally the clubmen resistance was over. Cromwell's dragoons, in defeating this stand by the clubmen, took 12 of the clubmen's colours. The loss of life is recorded as Cromwell lost 3 men, 1 an officer, and 12 wounded, with the clubmen a loss of 12 men, although some reports say 60. Many were injured, some fleeing. The prisoners took were held overnight in St. Mary's Church in Shroton. To the north of the church a grave was dug also, to bury those clubmen killed on Hambledon Hill. A later account by Joshua Sprigg, England's Recovery for the Public Good 1647, gives an interesting account of the aftermath of the battle regarding parliamentarian prisoners. Captain Patterson was sore hurt on our side, of which afterwards he died, and about 12 more. We found among them 16 of our men whom they had disarmed and taken prisoner, and threatened to hang some of them, but the tables were turned. We quartered that night in Shroton, and kept the clubmen in the church, and with them 4 vicars and curates, which were taken with them upon the hill, whereof, Mr. Talbot of Milton, and Mr. Lawford of Orkford. Cromwell, with the prisoners gathered in St. Mary's Church the day after the battle, spoke from the pulpit, with warning on the consequences of opposing the new model army. The clubmen were to have the liberty to defend themselves against plundering, but were to refrain in the future from stopping any soldier going about their business, and meetings such as had the day before, would not be countenanced. Any man who was on the list, just made deserved to be hanged, if he should be taken again opposing Parliament. Cromwell with the prisoners gathered in St. Mary's Church the day after the battle, he spoke from the pulpit, with warning on the consequences of opposing the new model army. Thereafter, the majority were let go. Reverend Thomas Brevel with others, a total of 16, were took to Sherborne and imprisoned. Fairfax was to see fit who was to be taken to London. Reverend Thomas Brevel was sequestered, then reinstated as rector of Compton Abbas until his death in 1655. Among the number also being released were no fewer than 4 vicars and curates. Of note of those captured was Robert Frampton, later to be the Bishop of Gloucester and later a non-juror. With his brothers also captured, an account of his sister looking for her dead brothers by lantern light on Hambledon Hill that night, can be read in The Life of Robert Frampton, Bishop of Gloucester, deprived as a non-juror, 1689. The clubmen's stance at Hambledon Hill on August 1645 is a show of a third force, a gathering by those outside the Royalist and Parliamentarian armies. Cromwell, as can be seen, did try to stop the bloodshed in negotiating a truce. Why the battle was fought is open to question. A wanting of those captured in Shaftesbury is of course a reason. A gathering of clubmen overtaking by events. An momentum of a musket fired. Rumour of a joining with the clubmen from Wiltshire may have given them a strength in numbers. What is certain, the battle at Hambledon was after, in consequence, an opportunity for gatherings, without licence issued, to be banned. This was passed through by Parliament, and directed at the clubmen. A battle fought in Dorset, ended in a loss of liberty for those outside the warring armies. A result of the war, where before, they had the right of